All right, so we're going to end the part. We're going to talk about the new CBA and the ramifications that we have going forward, because I still haven't heard the perfect conversation about it. And you did a lot of work last week on your pod trying to figure out why Philly was probably screwed with this James Harden thing. I had heard about the second apron and I didn't fully understand it. So I just spent 90 minutes just reading everything, sketching stuff out, and trying to understand why they created this new system. So just very quickly for people listening, everything kicks in next year. The salary cap is $134 million. The luxury tax is $162. I swear this isn't going to sound like math. The first apron for the tax is $169. And then the second apron of the tax is $179.5. And if you are above the second apron, all of these terrible things happen to your team, including you cannot use the mid-level exception. You cannot sign buyout players during the season. You cannot take more money back in trades. You cannot send cash out in trades. And you cannot deal first-round picks 7 years out. So, for example, Dallas wouldn't have been able to make the Kyrie Irving trade. Phoenix wouldn't have been able to make the Durant trade. Harden to Brooklyn never happens. Brogdon to Boston. That doesn't happen. The Gallinari and DiVincenzo signings last summer, Joe Ingles to Milwaukee, none of that happens. And the Clippers don't get Westbrook and Miami doesn't get Love. So those are just basic run-of-the-mill stuff. And it's going to put a shitload of pressure on these teams to stay under. I have a whole bunch of thoughts on how those teams might feel about this, which I think might surprise you. But if we're just looking at second apron teams in 2020, in this season that we just had, the Clips were at 192.9, way over. Warriors were at 192.4, way over. Milwaukee, 182.9, over. Just under were the Celtics, Dallas, and Phoenix. They were right under the second apron. But if you go to next year, Golden State's at 210.6 with the Poole contract. So they're fucked. They're second apron. It's happening. Clippers are at 201.8. plus Westbrook free agency. Miami's at 173.1, so they're $6 million away, and they have Gabe Vincent, Max Strus, and Kevin Love as free agents. Atlanta's at 170.4, Denver's at 168.7, Boston's at 166 and has Grant Williams as an RFA. Phoenix is at 165.6, so they're $13 million under, and they have free agents Craig and Landale, Okogie, and Biyombo. Milwaukee's at 157.8, and they have Lopez as a free agent. And he's going to be a $20 million guy in free agency. So you're going to have all these teams trying to figure out, do we fuck with the second apron or not? And it's going to change how we do stuff. I have way bigger picture stuff about how I think this is going to long-term affect the league. But short-term, why do you think they made this kick in next season? Because it feels really punitive for teams that had already built rosters a certain way who are now going to be fucked next season.
I feel like you have a better answer than I do. That's why you're asking that question.
No, I don't have an answer to that question. Because usually, when they change things, when they talked about, remember the double draft? We're going to let players come in right out of high school. Well, we got to do that 4 or 5 years down the road because that's not fair to teams that traded their picks or whatever. Teams need time to prepare for that. In this, they gave teams no time to prepare for anything. So you have the Warriors who are just basically, the Warriors might have to trade Poole this summer. They just hey, Spurs, you want Poole? Here, take them. We'll take a protected first and whatever, because then that will allow us to do all these other things. I just think it's weird that they didn't at least wait a year.
I think the draft pick restrictions for the second apron teams, that's not going to be until 24-25.
Okay.
So that's just a small part of it. As far as, looking at all this and the announcements made, and then you kind of dig through, and then you go to the people that trust it certainly better than you or I understand it. And then you're like, well, wait, does this mean there's kind of this philosophical hard cap that's still technically a soft cap? Because that's
it's a hard cap.
That's what it felt like. And now if we get into all the is there actually a real hard cap? Because if you just look at basketball related income and the split that's essentially 50-50, then we're operating with a hard cap in place already. But team to team, it's always been soft as opposed to the hard one for the NFL. When you look at the restrictions at the top of this, the stockpiling of talent for the top teams, like that feels like it's over. It just feels like they're going to be able
Which
to keep
is why
their
we're
own,
talking about this.
right. The teams are going to be able to keep their guys. But to look at Golden State and say, or any model, you're like, okay, you have 3 players that you drafted. They're all maxed. They're on kind of like their second max. So the escalators have gone crazy. You're putting together all this stuff. You don't get to buy out somebody else, some dude who wants to ring chase with you. You don't even get your taxpayer mid-level, which usually can add a nice player where you're about $6 million per, it leads to like $20 million or something like that. You're right. The DiVincenzo thing doesn't happen. The Gallo thing doesn't happen. So it felt like a real win. Apparently there were teams that weren't even close to these aprons that actually didn't want this to happen for the team part of it. But it feels the closest that we've ever had to like a hard cap in recent memory, even if it feels like these first and second apron violations are so far away from a middle and the bottom of the NBA salaries.
So here's how I'd explain it to people who are super confused right now and feel like they're in an AP history test or something. I think the players union really, really fucked this up. And they've fucked stuff up in the past, but I don't think they fully realize what they've unleashed with this, because I studied everything. I talked to some people. What they have now created, which we're going to have going forward, is a Hollywood system for an NBA team where you're going to have 2 stars that you're going to be able to put on your poster and in your commercial, right? Like in a movie, like Top Gun Maverick. It's like, well, it's Tom Cruise. He gets a shitload of money. And then we got Miles Teller.
Nice. Shout out. Yeah.
And then now we have a couple role players, like we got John Hamm and Glenn Powell. But for the most part,
John Hamm's not a role player.
Well, whatever. But he's, in half the movie.
He's your friend.
Well, but I'm saying like you really just need Cruise to make that movie, and you can fill in the other spots. And what the NBA is creating now is, here are your 2 awesome guys. And then everybody else has to fight for the other like 40 million, right? Because if we have stars, all the star contracts are going to be 50 million, 55 million, 60 million a year. Well, let's add it up. Let's use Celtics, Brown, and Tatum as an example. Tatum, his next contract, he's going to be making like 60 million a year. Brown, if he signs his deal, it's going to be almost 50. So that's 110. So now the Celtics have 70 million left to spend on everybody else in their roster. So even if you say like, oh, I only care about having 7 other guys with those guys, it's 70 million for 7 guys. And what's going to happen, and what I think the union really fucked up on, is the middle class is going to get destroyed. Like destroyed. It's going to be the opposite of what's happened in football. Because everybody's going to gravitate toward the big guys, and they're only going to be able to afford 2 of them. But like, here's an example. I use Boston. Here's an even better example. And this is, I can't believe like a team like OKC voted for this. What does OKC do? What do they do a couple years from now where they have Shea, they have Giddey, they have Chet Holmgren, they have fucking awesome Jalen Williams. They have those 4 guys, and all 4 of those guys are like $40 to $50 million guys. You're not going to be able to keep all 4 of them. Like that era is over. So these teams like them, like Utah, these teams that are stockpiling all these first-round assets so they can build these awesome young teams, you're actually getting fucked now with that strategy, because you're not going to be able to afford all those guys at the same time. So there's that. And then you have the Boston aspect of it, where it's like, is it worth it to pay $115 million a year to 2 guys and still deal with that second apron? I also think the rich owners kind of want the second apron because it's a hard cap and it'll prevent them from overspending. It's almost like a deterrent for themselves. And I don't think the union realized that either. So long story short, there's like 450 people in the NBA, something like that, 475.
It usually ends up being more, but yeah. I mean, you're right. You're right to the number. It's like 480 play or whatever.
And I would say 90% of those people are fucked now, because all the money is going to be going to 60 guys. And then everybody else is going to fight it out. Like the DeAndre Ayton max, there's no way Phoenix matches that now if we had the second apron stuff. So I just think the league's going to dramatically change. And I don't think people fully realize it yet. The Top Gun model is going to be the model we're heading toward, right? Or it's going to be like Homeland, where it's like if Homeland like spent, like Brian Cox was like a franchise guy, and it's like, all right, We got Brian Cox, and then we got to have all these actors you never heard of. You can do it, you can nail it, but it's really hard now. And I just don't know what this means for the league.
So you're basically saying, like, if you spend money on Steve Carell and Will Ferrell, we only may have money left over for James Spader.
And maybe not even James Spader. It's like James Spader's brother, Bob.
I like James Spader, to be honest with you. Retroactively, like he tried something different, went for it. I thought he executed it well.
Well, Step Brothers is a good example. It's like we got Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly, but we can't have Adam Scott. We can't have Catherine Hahn. We're replacing those people with cheap talent because we spent all our money on Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly.
Okay, so there's a lot to kind of go through here, and you're right. Like when I look,
but you agree with me, right? Like that, like from the stakes. Like I feel like those are the stakes now.
Yeah, because it's not. The argument would be, well, wait a minute. The players didn't fuck themselves because it's still the revenue split, and they added in the licensing stuff, which still seems weird that it took this long to get the licensing stuff in there. And it's not
the ownership stuff too is good.
Right. It's not that you can't spend this money. You can do those things. The problem is once you spend a certain amount of money, especially keeping your own people, which is your OKC example, which is probably still a little lofty in that, like, were you really going to have 4 max guys for that team? But they have the assets. They have the incoming assets that maybe they would. But then again, would Oklahoma City actually spend that kind of money on a team? Maybe. I don't know. That's a different topic. But the argument would be that, wait, you can still go ahead and spend that money. The point is that once you're past the second apron, you're like, well, who am I even allowed to spend it on? Because you're not going to be able to spend it on anybody other than minimum contracts. So you're not going to be able to round out the roster. So whether that was a talent dispersal thing, I think the biggest point of it is, like, what do the players truly understand about where that middle class is going to go? Because are you then going to have guys that should have been, in that 4-year, $100 million range that we're talking about here with some really nice players, where Jalen Brunson gets that contract, and now that contract looks like he's on the cheap in comparison to where some other guys get like 7-8 years into the league. So does that contract now become, and I'm not even talking about Jalen Brunson, but does that contract become a lot harder to even put on your balance sheet when you have the Jaylen Brown and Tatum situation, when you have a Durant and Booker situation, which is, again, why I think Phoenix looking at this going, you did the Durant trade in face of now one of the most difficult times to round out the rest of the roster. In the past, when you'd add the pieces, you'd think, okay, well, give it another year. Miami each year added something else to it. Golden State was still able to add some other pieces to it. I thought even Boston was a little light in 2007, 2008. They win it that year, but there were other pieces that you could put around it. If you're Phoenix right now, you're going, wait, like, what's our move? Like, we know we have depth and option issues. What's our move, especially, for everybody that wants to do this Kyrie sign and trade thing that thinks solves your problems, which I'll never fucking understand. If you do something like that, then it starts to trigger other things where you're like, even if you thought this was the right basketball decision, you're allowing yourself no flexibility. In the case of Durant, how many more years do you actually have with him as a true title contender, not based on skill, but totally based on his injury history?
I'll go further. I think if they knew this stuff was coming, I don't think the Phoenix would have made the KD trade because it would have been irresponsible. You can't do it. I'm looking at their active roster. So they have Durant at 47.6 next year and Booker's at 36. But then Booker jumps to 50.05 in 25. So in the 24-25 season, they're paying $101.2 million for 2 guys. 2 guys. So that's $79 million for the rest of the roster before they trigger that second apron thing. They have Ayton on the books for 34. So now I have $34 million for the rest of my roster, basically, to stay away, or $40 million, whatever. There's so many different big ramifications for the contenders. Like, Grant Williams is a good one. Guess who the Celtics aren't re-signing? Grant Williams. They can't. There's no way they can do it now. They're on the books next year for $166 million. And that's with a bunch of people coming off. Like, you have your $1 million, your $1.2 million, like people like Blake Griffin, stuff like that.
But the Celtics core, if you look at the sheet, other than Grant, like, that whole thing's pretty intact. They're actually
pretty
like,
good.
This is like this is year one of this 2-year window where it's like you still have all these guys.
Right.
Go ahead.
But Grant even if you're just filling minimum contracts, you're close to that second apron anyway next year. And Grant's potentially like a $20 million guy. Like San Antonio, who's going to have a shitload of cap space and has a chance to be pretty good right away with Wemby. They're going to have the ability to get two awesome kind of guys like that, right? They might have the ability to offer Grant, awesome role players, right? Like Grant's been in big games. They could offer Grant a contract.
I just wanted a clarification on awesome.
Well, I meant
you said
awesome
role player, I would agree
with
you. Yeah.
Let's say they go 18, 16, 14, 3 years for Grant, right? Where it decreases. And then they also do that with Brook Lopez. And now they have Brook Lopez and Grant with Wemby because they can just use the second apron stuff against these teams. I don't know how Milwaukee keeps Lopez. I don't see it. I don't know how Golden State keeps Draymond, Poole, and Clay. I think it's actually impossible. And I think they're going to have to attach Kuminga to one of their guys to get under the thing, unless they just say, fuck it, we're going to pay the apron this 1 year and then figure it out. But you do that, there's so many bad ramifications to that. The other thing, if you're like the smaller market teams, this is another thing I didn't get how they voted for this. They're not getting the luxury tax paychecks from these different rich teams anymore, right? Like Balmer just spending whatever and the Warriors spending whatever. And the lower, the Charlotte and OKC, they can just grab these luxury. Now, if nobody's going to go over a certain level, you're not getting that kind of money either.
Okay, yeah, but I looked at that. It's very rare that any team would end up the tax floor or the salary cap floor. 90% of the cap. You have to spend 90% of the cap. And if you don't, you have to pay everybody on the team remaining
I'm not talking
number.
about that. I'm just talking about teams that aren't tax teams getting money from the teams that are the tax teams.
Yeah, but
they have that penalty stuff.
Yeah, but the way I read that is that the tax dispersal checks wouldn't go to a team that's below the floor, right?
No, but they could just have a payroll of like 140 and get tax money from other teams. So there's going to be less tax money. I think like the days of like last year, we had Joe Ingles, Gallinari. There's that whole class of guys that are getting like 8-9 million. PJ Tucker from Philly. I just think those contracts are gone. You know, it's like the equivalent of the NFL when you have the veterans like in their early 30s, like the Bobby Wagner types, where it's like, wow, Bobby Wagner's going to play for the Rams for $2 million. That's what's going to happen in the NBA. You're going to have these really, really good playoff proven guys that are now going to be available for $1.5-2 million. So in a weird way, it might help some of these teams once that all shakes out, because you're going to have guys going, well, if I'm only going to make this, I might as well go play with Jokic, or I might as well go play with Curry. So I don't know, maybe it strengthens them, but I just think when we lose the ability for contenders to keep Grant Williams, keep Brook Lopez, people like that, that's going to have a dramatic impact on the league. It just is.
Yeah, the teams may say, all right, screw it in this first cycle through it and keep everybody, and then go, we were screwed anyway, and now we'll be even more screwed, like moving forward. Like this will be it. Because I always thought the Giannis thing would be really interesting, because even in the best version of events for the Bucks, they were going to have to reinvent themselves a second time. Like there was going to be the next stage of Giannis and how they would build it around him. And that's why I brought up, like, again, I'm not saying this would happen, but a hypothetical, like, does Middleton just pick up his player option for $40 million next year? Or does he opt out knowing that, hey, let's do something less annually so you keep another piece, but I need longer term money? You know, a lot of times I'll always default to probably the easier one, where Milwaukee's like, this might not be the best plan, but can we really move on for somebody like this for like a draft pick? You know, that's where you get the really ballsy GMs. That's like the Danny Ainge stuff that he would have done. Maybe he does it in Utah. He certainly would have done it in Boston. Like if you like somebody in the draft, you go, you know what? I wonder if I don't get a little aggressive here with a weird package for a team that's a title contender to reinvent this stuff on the fly. Like you have to have real balls as a GM to even pull that stuff off. So my guess would be, it's always kind of like the state, like we'll see the rosters. Will teams, I guess I should ask it this way. Will teams start thinning out stuff? Will they start making those decisions this summer? Or will they take the hit knowing that having no change in plan is better than planning for something down the road when I don't even know what the rest of my team is like? Are certain teams going to try to get in front of this to have flexibility a year or two from now? Or are teams just going to say, all right, well, I don't even know what that world looks like. So I'll just stick with what I have, knowing how punitive it'll become and knowing I'll have even less flexibility than I do now. And that's why I always bring up the Phoenix thing. Like if they just say, fuck it, let's just run it back. Like, okay. And for the life of me, I know Ayton's disappointing. I know Chris Paul's aged, and this was the year where it feels very real that the decline has happened. But why is Kyrie a solution? And why is Kyrie in a sign and trade in versions of that contract where they would get hard capped? Like, why would you do that for that guy?
Because 7 years ago, he hit a big shot.
There's another part that I want to stay on this too, real quick. I don't know necessarily, if the players are looking around going, wait a minute, did we fuck the middle class here a little bit? Like it's still a 50-50 revenue split.
They did.
But what does this mean for like my group of players? And then the other part of that is, well, hey, the stars are the stars and they're actually still undervalued and they deserve to make all the money they possibly can. But this feels a lot like the lack of cap smoothing that happened prior to Durant signing with the Warriors, where it was very clear either the players didn't understand it or were told something different. And Michelle Roberts, who did an awful job in explaining this, and people in the media kept writing about how amazing it was, and if you criticized her, then you were criticizing her for the wrong reasons. I actually think the real bias was that it was funny that people were defending her, and then if you weren't like Team Michelle Roberts, then there was something wrong with you. And
right.
I've talked to
then
enough
former
players. Right. And then I talked to enough players I feel really comfortable with this, and for whatever reason, like, I love John Wall's quote about Reggie Jackson so fucking much when all that went down, when Alan Crabb and Evan Turner, and look, we were just talking with CJ about this. He's like, I benefited from it and it was wrong. And that's why this time around, we should have smoothed it out. He's the president of the Players Association. I benefited from it and realized in the moment how wrong it was. And I wanted to make sure this didn't happen again. All right.
Yeah.
And John Wall goes like, Reggie Jackson, I make the same as Reggie Jackson. It was the best quote. So I think there's a lesson in there, and I promise I'll get to the point. Whenever we talk about like environmental stuff, right? I'm of the mindset that you're not going to get everybody on board until your water's brown and your kids like are orange. Right? That's just the way we are. We can be told something's happening, but we don't understand it until it's actually happened. And in the non-cap smoothing out, you were told philosophically what would happen. It had to happen to you. It had to happen to the players. It had to happen to all these guys to be like, wait, so just this free agent class gets paid? Wait, the Warriors get fucking Kevin Durant? Like, wait, it's happening. And the lesson in that is that we're really bad at listening. We're really good at going, oh, this actually did happen to me. And now I understand it better. That's why with this new CBA, it needs to play out. Like it needs to live for a year or two to then go, oh, this is what they were either intending to do. This is what the unintended consequence was.
Yeah, but but you and I can kind of see it already though, where it's going. I think that's the alarming part. And I think maybe it came from a good place, right? I think the owners and maybe the players too wanted to put some mechanisms in that would make it a little more likely that people would stay with their teams, the best players, right?
Do you think part
that's
of this,
where this comes from?
Do you think some of these aprons too, when you look at how restrictive it can get, that was like another, how like the Rose extension thing was like, you can't have two of those guys on the same team. And you're like, oh, you know what? That was about the best players that are drafted and get that extra bump on their extension, their rookie extension. That's about making sure those guys can't all load up again like LeBron. All right. That's what that is.
I think that's what they're trying to do, but I don't think they realize how they're going to decimate the middle class. What's weird is football. I just think the football system's better. And there's some stuff, like, I don't love the franchise tag. It feels, like you look at the situation like Lamar in Baltimore, it just feels wrong. But for the most part, the spirit of football seemed, and I have a shitload of issues with football. But the most important thing about football is that it's really hard to lose your star quarterback. The quarterback's the most important guy in the team. He's the face of the franchise. And we just don't have movement with quarterbacks. And they're able to always like redo deals and look ahead and try to be proactive about signing somebody. And then even if it goes sideways, like it did with Lamar in Baltimore, you can still end up keeping him. In basketball, you can't rip up deals. If it goes sideways, you're going to lose the guy. And there seems to be no real connective tissue to the team and the fan base with the guy that they just watched grow into the guy. So they've tried to change some of that with how big these supermax things can be and stuff like that. But it doesn't give the team the tax relief in the way that I wish it did. Like, to me, it's like, look at Curry. Curry's been on the Warriors since 2009, and he makes a shitload of money. He makes like $60 million a year. But they get no credit for the fact that this was their guy. They drafted him. They've kept him this whole time. He stayed. Nobody gets a benefit from that. Where you'd think like it would be logical after like year 8 or year 9, maybe it's his contract, 2% of it doesn't count against the tax each year after year 8, right? And if he's been on the team for 14 years, so that's 7 years, 2% per year. Now that contract, 14% of it doesn't count against the tax. Like, incentivize these guys to want to stay together. And they're trying to do it in this roundabout way that now it's going to be 2 guys and then the supporting cast changes year after year after year. And then we lose what we had with the Nuggets this year, or we lose with what we had with the Warriors last year, where it was like they had real connective tissue because they had these 4 or 5 guys that had been together a while. I look at a team like OKC and I just don't know how they're going to ever build it. They're trying to build it the old-fashioned way and be smart and do the draft. And Giddey's going to be a max guy. Shea is going to be underpaid eventually. In the NFL, you'd just be like, Shea, we've ripped up your deal. You have a better deal. In the NBA, can't really do that. What if Holmgren's awesome? Jalen Williams is going to be a borderline max guy. You can't have all those guys. So I don't like when teams are smart and they get penalized for it. And basically, we've turned into this league now where it's like you just need to get your 2 guys. Just make sure you don't fuck up the 2 guys, right? Atlanta's going to be in that situation with Trae Young and DeJounte. Are those going to be your 2 guys? Because once you've decided, that's it. Those are your 2 guys.
That Atlanta
Minnesota,
thing.
Towns and Edwards. And Gobert, that's another trade that would never happen now. They could never do that Gobert trade now because now you have Towns, Gobert, and Edwards. You can't keep all 3 of those guys.
Yeah, Atlanta has, and it's not even about the Trae stuff that we talk about all the time. The DeJounte and him going to market and moving the assets and starting to understand the divide between maybe Travis Schlenk at the time being like, I don't think this is actually a great idea. Like, this doesn't make a ton of sense for us because even though it's cool now, like, this could be a really bad transaction. And then it's like, it's back to the old stuff that we were talking about, joking about Antoine a little bit, but back then it was whoever your best player was just your max player. And you go, all right, if I'm paying somebody $200 million, I've got to make sure that he's Steph and not Bradley Beal, right? Like, our $200 million guy is awesome and guarantees us like a real chance in the playoffs. And then the other team's going, our $200 million guy puts up big numbers and we don't sniff anything. And then think
about Winger with the Wizards. You got Kuzma coming up as a free agent. You got Porzingis who's going to opt out, and you're already paying Beal $50 million a year. And it's like, do I keep my big 3 that went 40 and 42 last year, or 38 and 44, or whatever? Is this what I'm going to lock down? And guess who gets blamed if this doesn't work? Winger.
Well, he can at least say he didn't do the Beal deal, and I still think Beal, even though you and I disagree on this one, I think there's a play there. I think there's a way to move him. Despite that contract. Yeah, I'm not saying it's going to be awesome. Look, I think there's, looking at some of the CBA stuff, though, I do think that there's ways for teams, like, it's about the transactions. I felt like it was more about the transactions outside of what you've done. But if you hit on enough of your own guys and you're paying them that much, it's just going to be a different world now of filling in the gaps, the way that we've been used to it now for, like, I don't know if it's 20 years, maybe it's a little less than that. But when you had the dudes, then you knew the DiVincenzo's, the Gallinaris, all of those guys. Being able to re-sign your 7th guy for still a pretty big number. You can keep him. You can keep that 6th or 7th guy for a number that's a lot bigger than he would get somewhere else. Or I should say a lot bigger than other people's 6th or 7th guys. But then it just means that all of the filling in the spaces the rest of the way, I don't know how teams are going to do it now. Like, that's the part that jumps out the most, that there's all of these restrictions if you've hit on your own guys or screwed up the guys you've paid.
Well, so Bruce Brown, good example. Player option this year. They're paying Jokic 46.9 and Jamal almost 34. So they're over 80 with those two.
Right, but they're lucky. They're lucky their two's only 80.
Right. And then they have Porter and Gordon for a combined 55 next year. So now I'm in the 135 range. And I have KCP at 14.7. So now I'm at 150. And I only have 5 guys. Now I got to figure out 29 million for my other guys. Hey, this is why we want to bring this up. We're putting on some radar now. Like the Lakers, every Laker fan I know is like, oh, we'll re-sign Reeves and Rui, right? Reeves he'll probably get the 98.7 from somebody or close. Rui, oh, he's a $20 million a year guy in the old net. It's like, actually, is he? Because
the Rui is a $20 million guy now thing. How fast that changed. This is like the Fournier thing all over again. You couldn't get a first for Fournier. Then he was a $17 million
guy.
Right.
Yeah.
Although the last year is not fully guaranteed, I don't believe. Rui, who all Washington could get was a second rounder for him, but then it's like, oh, yeah, he's a $20 million a year guy.
Well, like, here's what the Lakers are looking at.
I don't know. It seems to be a little lofty, but
the Lakers are at 94 for 4 guys. They have Reeves and Rui as restricted free agents, and let's just say they sign both of them, and it's a combined $42 million a year. So now we're at close to 140. They still have Lonnie Walker. They have Schroeder, D'Lo. And if there's any chance for them to get Kyrie, D'Lo has to be in that trade, and Kyrie's probably like 30. The way I see it, I don't think it's possible for them to bring back Reeves and Rui and get Kyrie. You'd have to go over the apron, and then if you go over the apron now, I can't get buyout guys. We can't get a mid-level, all the stuff we've talked about. Philly's another one. You talked about Philly on your podcast. Let's say the cost for Harden is $40 million a year. Philly's at 124.2 right now. They have Harden as a free agent. They have Niang, and they have Milton, who they'll probably let go. If they let Harden go, there actually might be some opportunity for them because they'll have some space maybe to sign and trade, do whatever. I look at Minnesota. They're at 144 right now, and Naz Reid's a free agent. I think we joked about Rui. I think Naz Reid actually might be like a $17, $18 million guy. I think Naz Reid is good. So they probably lose him. So now that Gobert trade gets worse because you've lost Walker Kessler, all those picks. You lost Vanderbilt. Now you're also losing Naz Reid. And you've created this team that has Gobert and Anthony Edwards and Towns, and you basically can't put anyone around them anymore. What happens to Jaden McDaniels in 2 years when he's a new contract guy? Are you able to keep all 4 of those guys? So yeah, that's why we're talking about this now, because I think when we get to the summer, I think people are going to be like, wait, what's going on? The Celtics like literally can't afford Grant Williams? And I think there's going to be like 10, 12 teams like that.
The other thing I think it's going to be kind of fun too is the first round picks now that are all coming due, where, you know, there's already been a little bit of it, but this group of teams, and I'll defend it forever. If you can trade for Paul George and it locks you into Kawhi, even though it has not worked out, it's been a massive disappointment and it's been really expensive. And you just lost Winger, who is a terrific executive, so I think that's a slam dunk hire for the Wizards.
Me too.
But it's kind of back to my like smoothing the cap environmental point. Like when it starts happening, like it's easy to trade picks. Like the trading future picks is like the adjustable rate mortgage, where you're like, well, what are the payments going to go to in like 7 years? And nobody ever says, I'll probably be doing worse. I shouldn't sign this mortgage. Everybody, the way we are wired, will be like, oh, the payments are only this for like however. I mean, hell, you could just talk about it with credit cards. Like no introductory, like, oh yeah, well, things will be way better. I'll just pay that off like when I'm kicking ass a year from now, 15 months, adjustable rate. It's so easy to trade picks that you might not even be around for. But when you're going to see these teams, maybe some of these teams voted for this because they're not going to have any picks that they have to sign. So like,
good point.
It doesn't even matter. Granted, that's such a small number of teams that I'm just sort of making a joke about the whole thing. But we are heading into like bills being due for a lot of these teams. And that's why I think you're right that we could have, wait, that guy's available? How did that happen? It might not happen this summer. It might just be like, hey, this is going to suck. We'll take our medicine later, which is exactly the same thing as the draft pick deal, right? It's a different mechanism, to improve your roster or to change your roster. But I'm glad you brought it up, because when I was looking through, like, the Reeves problem the Lakers have maybe more than anything is that the way his contract works, even if they want to match, which they can, they have to backload the hell out of it. So we all love Austin Reeves. There's a number at the back end of that contract. They're like, wait, he's going to be on the books for that? So what does that mean for AD in a new contract? Where's LeBron at this point? So now Davis
LeBron might retire.
Yeah, right. Well, he might retire.
He's, left that Denver series. He thought maybe it was time to go. Could be time.
Yeah, I'm going to need more.
He might be done.
Can you say I'm back if you never retired?
It was terrible. I've mentioned it now in my last 4 podcasts.
You have?
Again.
I don't know.
I got madder about it as the week went along, because it's just take the fucking loss. You got your ass kicked. You got swept. Jokic is the best player in the world.
There we go.
Take the loss for 2 hours. Just take it.
Took 2 hours. We got there.
Golden State and the Clippers are the two that I don't know what they do next year. Maybe because you made the point, maybe these teams just take it. Golden State is at 210.6, and DDV has a 4.7 million player option that, who knows, maybe he'll exercise it. But they're going to have to do some chicanery. And then the Clips at almost 202 already, really with no tradable assets that, maybe, you could try to stick more Marcus Morris on somebody. I don't know how you would. I'd like, if I'm the Spurs, I'm like, cool, I get Marcus Morris for free. I'm not cool. I still don't want him. And they have Plumlee as a free agent too. So they're going to have no backup center. So those are the two that seem like they're going to get hurt. And then Miami, is Gabe Vincent, who's like a legitimate free agent. So Strus. Are those like 8-figure a year guys for you now? I feel like Gabe Vincent's probably a $10 million a year guy at this point for somebody. Like, he wouldn't make sense for the Spurs. I keep bringing up the Spurs, but I'm really focused on, I want Wembanyama's team to be good right away. Gabe Vincent on the Spurs, that's nice.
Gabe Vincent at $10 million doesn't seem crazy. It's just that there the post-Spo correction. Remember there was a Brad Stevens correction there for a while. It's like, wait, what happened? What happened to this guy?
Yeah, I thought Evan Turner could initiate the offense. And then Phoenix, I don't know what happens with them, because they're not going to have Craig and Landale and Okogie and Biyombo, or they could potentially re-sign them. But I guess they could just eat the second apron and that's it. Maybe Ishbia doesn't care. He's like, I'm Matt Ishbia. We're fine.
I think the Ayton play is that they have to figure out a way to turn Ayton into 3 pieces. And
that is 3 cheaper pieces.
Right. Like, is there a Miles Turner play? If Ayton signed the offer sheet with the Pacers, could they bring in Miles Turner, who, along with Plumlee, were 2 of the best intensity defenders against Jokic? I'm not saying the numbers are awesome, but I still talk about Turner against Jokic in a regular season game, because I was like, man, this guy's actually finding a way to work. And you get one of the guards that the Pacers don't see as part of their future, where you're kind of building out something, knowing that, okay, clearly the Suns can survive without Ayton. Now, whoever the new coach is, not being Monty Williams, you're already in a better spot than you were the year before.
Kevin Young?
Kevin Young. Well, just because the Ayton Williams thing was clearly past the point of being fixed. It really appears that wasn't going into the season. It wasn't going to be fixed coming off of the Dallas loss. So they went into it where that relationship just wasn't right the whole time. So maybe the argument is, and you do this if you're Kevin Young in an interview, you tell the owner all the players are awesome and they're all fixable, and you have the plan. That's you don't go.
Booker, he's Booker's guy. Booker loves him. Monty Williams didn't get along with Ayton and Jay Crowder. Those were 2 of his best 5 players. So he's batting 60% with the most important guys in the team to get along with.
By the way, did you hear some of the stuff coming out of the combine? There was slight momentum for a 3rd round of the draft. And all I could think of was how mad Hinkie would be that he's not a GM, so he couldn't stockpile 13 third rounders.
He'll come back. That, if anything will drive him to come back, I feel like it'll be a 3rd round. I think Daryl would love the 3rd round as well. Daryl would be super excited about it. Wait, last thing on
Charlotte
this,
and Philadelphia control the 3rd round.
Chris Paul, $30.8 million next year, but he is
it's half guaranteed.
Can be bought out for half.
Yeah.
And if you can't find a market for Ayton, that would be plan B if I'm the Suns. I got to figure out how to move this
might
Chris
be able
Paul
to do
contract. Both. Yeah, maybe you can. And maybe it's a team like Dallas. I still feel like Chris Paul has value next year for somebody who has cap space, and we've seen what happens when he goes to new teams. But I just feel like Phoenix is going to have Durant, Booker, and I have no idea who else is going to be in the team.